Hello YouTube community, my name is Jacob13, and what a pay-per-view that was. Today we're going to be talking about Double or Nothing from yesterday, and holy cow. Now let me first just say that I apologize, it is 9:14 as I started recording this. I wasn't able to get this out in time because it went a little bit longer than I thought it would, about a half hour longer than I thought it would. And by the time that I wanted to record the episode for that, I was very tired from the 4 hours of wrestling roughly that I had just witnessed. So, without further ado, let's get into it. I'm going to try and make this a little bit quicker than the past, so I'm just going to sort of read off of notes and go quickly. So, I didn't get to watch the first match. I didn't really know that they were going to be starting the pre-show an hour before, or whatever it was that they ended up doing. I don't know why I didn't know that. It was just sort of a miscue on my part. But the Best Friends did win, so I got one of my predictions right there. Apparently it was a fairly decent match. It went about 15 minutes. Best Friends beat Private Party. I'll have to watch that in some other manner at some point. I did buy the pay-per-view, so I might be able to watch it on replay. So then after that, they did their typical spiel for the pre-show, came back, and the show started in earnest. And they had a nice little promo at the very beginning, a nice promo package to get you ready for what was going on. And within that, they did a memorial to Shad Gaspard, which, again, we mentioned on the last episode, the AEW pay-per-view review, the AEW Dynamite review. My feelings and thoughts on that and how sorely missed he will be. But it's good to see that they even took advantage of their spotlight in this capacity to send their gratitude and thanks and memorialize Shad Gaspard in some way, even if it was, again, only for a few seconds in their major promo for the beginning of the show. But I think that was very nice of them. Also, something you might notice is the audio has been bumped up a little bit. I was told recently that the audio was a little bit low, so I bumped it up a little bit to see if that would help any. Anyway, so the first match of the night, which was very surprising to me. I didn't think this would be the first one, but I probably should have figured as much. Casino Battle Royale was the first match that they had the last time. Should have thought the Casino Ladder match would be the first time, whatever. But the ladder match happened. So there were some promos prior to the match happening. Kip Sabian had one, Orange Cassidy had one, Chris Daniels had one for both of his members, which was sort of a nice little swerve there to make people think, oh, maybe he's the guy that's going to come in. But regardless, fairly decent. Match started off with Scorpio Sky and Frankie Kazarian in the ring. They had a nice little, honorful moment where they both went to go get ladders. They looked at each other and was like, nah, we'll just fight it out for the first 2 minutes. After that, Sabian came out, and Jimmy Havoc came out and helped him out. Penelope Ford also got involved, so it was sort of like those three had various moments throughout the match where they did something or another. Ended up coming up with Darby Allin next. There was a lot of fighting and stuff that went on, but I'm not going to go through all of the individual things. I have so many notes as is, and it would take me forever to try and go through the entire match play-by-play. But Darby Allin came out next, and the crazy thing that he did, which was probably the spot of the night. There are maybe two spots in this match that I could consider to be spot of the night, but this was probably the spot of the night entirely. He jumped from the top of a ladder that had to be at least 15 foot with his skateboard, and he landed through another ladder. Was going to try and put Frankie through that ladder with his skateboard maneuver, and he missed him and snapped the ladder. You could kind of see that the ladder had bent a little bit prior to that. I obviously think that they gimmicked that ladder so that it could split like that, and I think you have to in order for those ladders to split. But that was a crazy, insane spot. After him was Orange Cassidy, and he took the entire 2 minutes, pretty much, coming around and getting into the ring, trying to put the ladder up, not actually wanting to get the ladder up, so he just sort of stands on it, doing his typical comedy routine shtick. After him came Colt Cabana. More comedy ensued, but this time Colt's a little bit smarter about how he does comedy, so he's not going to go along with Orange Cassidy's BS. He's going to do his own BS. He ended up getting his fingers caught into a ladder when SCU tipped it over. He was climbing up, had his fingers inside the rungs. They tipped him over. He went into the corner and looked like he didn't get hurt, and the ladder snapped shut onto his fingers. That was a really nice, funny, but also obviously painful spot. Looked pretty good. Joey Janela then came out next, and he immediately does a senton onto SCU and OC, and holy cow, this match was insane from start to finish. This was a very high-paced match. Luchasaurus then came out next and ended up powerbombing Sabian onto everybody. It looked like he was going to chokeslam him, but he changed that into a powerbomb at the end. Except for Kaz and Alan. Alan was out for a very long time after his legs basically collapsed in on himself. I hope he didn't hurt his knees or his leg very much, because it looked like he sold that very well. I couldn't be sure, but the fact that no one really went over to check on him after he did it, and he sort of was left to writhe in pain, makes me think that either he's done this before and he knows the pain and is fine with it, or he wasn't actually as injured as I thought he was, which in either case is fucking impressive. Dude's a madman. And Kaz has sort of been finding ways to pick his spots and such throughout the entirety of the match. So then after that, Alan does a sunset flip onto Luchasaurus, but when he does this, he also ends up hurting his knee again. Prior to that, though, Kaz was chokeslammed through a ladder, or onto a ladder, I should say. And then the mystery entrant arrived for the final person. Obviously, the mystery entrant was someone who I did not guess, so I missed points out on that. But it was Brian Cage, who was somebody that I probably should have guessed. I actually considered it on numerous occasions, but never really mentioned it. But yeah, he ends up coming out, and he's accompanied by Taz, so this furthers the story between Taz and Darby. And because Darby ended up taking out Luchasaurus, he was the last man in the ring when Brian Cage came out. They had a nice little stare down. Brian Cage F10'd the shit out of him. And very clearly, I'm thinking that Darby Allin and Brian Cage are going to be having a feud at some point, either prior to him challenging Jon Moxley for the title, or Brody Lee if he wins the title, of course. But something like that will happen. So then Janela got brought in by a suplex by Cage at some point, and that suplex apparently hurt the shit out of him because he went, "Fucking motherfucker," and it was the most hilarious thing ever, because I was like, well, you can tell that this is pay-per-view because they're allowing shit like that. Anyway, so then everyone figuring out who the main enemy was at this point, being Brian Cage, because of how insane he was tearing through everybody. They all worked together and then eventually just like pile a bunch of crap on top of him, including a prop poker chip that they took 5 people to carry. Obviously, it didn't need that many of them. It was just sort of an awkward thing in terms of carrying, but I'm sure that 1 or 2 of them probably could have done it themselves. But it made it look cooler, and it made it look like when Brian Cage was able to eventually break free, that it was more impactful. You know what I mean? So then Orange Cassidy and Luchasaurus had a stare down. Orange Cassidy tries to chokeslam Luchasaurus, and he's just like unable to, obviously. And then Marco Stunt comes in and gives him a chokeslam with the assistance of a ladder and, of course, Luchasaurus. That was a very interesting spot. I like that one a lot. Janela later on does a Death Valley driver onto OC, onto Cage's poker chip outside the ring. And I was just like, this poor guy is getting so beat up without actually getting beat up. It's Brian Cage, though, so like he's obviously going to come back. That's just this insane man's like shtick. But holy cow, that was an insane spot. I like that one a lot. Then Cage and Luchasaurus had a brawl because Cage broke out from underneath the poker chip. Cage ends up winning that one, surprisingly enough. You would think, based on how they've built up Luchasaurus to be this pretty much unstoppable monster who really is only equaled by a couple of people within the business. Probably Lance Archer would beat the crap out of him. Probably Brody Lee would beat the crap out of him. But he and Wardlow are sort of seen on equal footing. Brian Cage beat him on this, and that was, I think, very interesting to see where the general idea of where Brian Cage would be in terms of the power levels of AEW characters and wrestlers. But he ends up putting him through, not through, but powerbombing him into a ladder. Cage then puts Alan onto a ladder and sort of just like spins him around outside. Alan's head hits the top rung of another large ladder, the one that he jumped off of. Either the top rung or it was like the suspension portions of it. Something like that. Looked painful as hell. That dude went through a lot this match, but it's Darby Allin, so I hope that he's okay, but he's used to this kind of punishment. That's what he likes to do. So, have at it, man, I guess, but that was crazy and insane. And then after he did that, everybody out on the floor, Brian Cage the only one left in the ring, he wins the match. I give this match an A minus. It was a very good match. There was a whole lot of fun, and something that I noticed at the very end is that Cage was forming a black eye. I'm guessing some of that happened when he got stuff hit into him via the piling stuff onto him. It could have been from a punch earlier on in the match, but you could see that his left eye might have even been his right. It's weird with the mirroring of cameras and stuff. But I think it was his right eye, now that I think about it. It had a bit of a swollen up look to it, and it was very clear it was going to become a black eye. But yeah, the match was very good. I'm only giving it A minus instead of an A or an A plus grade because there was just a lot of carnage and a lot of people that looked like they might have possibly gotten injured. Darby Allin's spot was insane, and it looked really good, but it also looked like it hurt the crap out of him, and I don't like to see that kind of damage to the athletes as much anymore, so I sort of take points off of it from that nowadays, but there's nothing really more to complain about from that perspective. The match in general, though, A minus, and in comparison to other matches on the card, makes sense where I put it. The next match was, in my opinion, probably the best match in terms of work rate in the entire show, and that's saying a lot for the people that were involved. It was MJF versus Jungle Boy. So both of these guys are in their early 20s and are very clearly still have the best years ahead of them in their wrestling careers. There was a total of 9 years in the business combined. I think 5 for MJF and 4 for Jungle Boy. That is insane. Now, these guys have had matches in the past before. There's one on Dynamite back in February that they mentioned on commentary, which MJF won. And they've also had matches on the Indies. They had sort of a bit of a feud, if I recall. And I think the Jungle Boy did fairly well in that one. He might have won more often than MJF did. I don't quite know. I wasn't there to watch it, and I haven't checked it out yet. But this match was really good. It starts off with MJF's entrance, and he has a much better attire than he had at Revolution, I think it was. He had a really crappy robe on at one of the pay-per-views. I think it was Revolution. It might very well have been the one prior to that. It might have been like an All Out or something even. But yeah, this was a much better attire. His robe, I guess that's what you'll call it, looked much better this time around, and I was very happy for him because he needs to have some sort of good clothing when he comes out, because I think that just really adds to his character. The match begins with a bunch of tit for tat moves. Jungle Boy tries to kip up, and MJF is just like, yeah, no, we're not doing that today, and just slams him back down. Later on, MJF tries to kip up, and Jungle Boy's like, nah, not today, and slams him down. They were both sort of grabbing their balls and showing off to the other person at points. Things like that. There's a lot of tit for tat in the very beginning of the match. And there's just a great amount of back and forth that went on throughout it as well. Then MJF has a stroke of brilliance, and he was really good at this throughout the entire match, showing really smart wrestling skills. And for somebody who's so young into the business, again, 5 years is nothing to sneeze at. That's an awful lot of time. But for someone who is only 24, like he is, and 5 years of experience, that's veteran maneuver kind of stuff right there. But he ends up faking that his leg is hurt, and sells that for a little while until he's able to blindside Jungle Boy. It's a very typical heel tactic, but one that he performed to perfection. And this kind of smart heel work was characteristic of his performance throughout the entire match. Eventually Jungle Boy comes back, and he does a 4-corner spot where typically you'd see people smash the head of their opponent into all 4 corners, like it was a 4 corners match or whatever. But this time it was into the ropes, and he just does some chops in all the corners. I thought that was a very nice callback spot. One of the things that I like about MJF is that he's able to take the old school kind of style in all of his matches and infuse it with the more new school kind of style that I much prefer. And it's able to make me really despise him for certain things, but also have to watch in admiration because of how well he's able to seamlessly combine the two styles and make it more of a modern type match. And this was probably one of the best examples of it. His match against Cody was also fairly decent in that regard, but I think that this match was better in terms of overall work rate from both competitors. Cody in his match against MJF was not on the top of his game, in my opinion. Anyway, at certain points, there were a bunch of brawls and stuff or back and forths, but there was one in particular that I really liked. It was a chop fest where they were basically doing the typical New Japan style of like, go ahead, chop me, lay your best shot into me. And it leads into this insane counter at the end of it with Jungle Boy going into a crossface. Really good stuff. Jungle Boy starts to take the lead a little bit, and then he's on the top rope. And Aubrey Edwards, who is the referee in this match, is holding on to the ropes just sort of as like a, hey, are you good, man? And partially because in the past I've noticed that the referees hold the ropes occasionally when they want to steady somebody. But this was for a different reason. It was actually for a storyline reason within the match. MJF like grabs her leg, shakes her, and this ends up causing Jungle Boy to basically get ballsed onto the corner. And he can't be disqualified for that because it wasn't his fault. It was Aubrey Edwards' fault. So the match continues. And it looks like that this is going to be the thing that gets MJF the win. But Jungle Boy fights out of it and ends up doing an avalanche Liger bomb onto him. Holy cow. It only goes for 2, though. Crazy. There was an exchange up of roll-ups at some point not too long after that, which ended up with MJF poking Jungle Boy into the eyes. And you could see that definitely disoriented him. But Jungle Boy, being the fighting man that he is, tried again to come back, but gets up into another roll-up exchange that ends with a European clutch. MJF gets the 1-2-3 for that win. It was a damn good match. I was so impressed with both of them, but obviously MJF's smart tactics as a heel throughout the match were the thing that really sold it for me. Such a good match. I'm going to give this one an A. Probably, as I said, the best work rate match on the card. That being said, this card was not based on work rate kind of stuff. It was a lot of crazy, kooky kind of stuff. You had the ladder match. You had the Stadium Stampede. You had a no disqualification match for the women's title. You had Brody Lee versus Jon Moxley, which you would think could also be a work rate match, but no, they're just going to go battering each other because that's just Jon Moxley's new style, or the style that he wants to return to, I should say. But yeah, very good match. Cody versus Lance Archer was next. This match was a bit of a letdown for me, but also still a very decent match. So they come out with the TNT Championship. It's not finished yet, but it in my opinion, looks like trash. I'm not a huge fan of it. I'm hoping that when they do put the gold belt plating on it, it will look better. The TNT in the center looks pretty decent. The champion on the bottom looks okay. But I'm not a big fan of the outside portions of it on the outside of the main center. I'm not sure what those are called. I'm not a big fan of the way that looks, and the red design of the leather also is not particularly my favorite. I understand why they're doing it, TNT's coloring and all that, but it's just not particularly for me just yet. Maybe I'm spoiled because of the AEW title, the world title, looking so good. Maybe I'm spoiled because I'm used to mid-card or other possible main event belts looking almost as good as the regular belt, like the Intercontinental Championship. It looks as good as the World Heavyweight Championship, or the IWGP US Heavyweight Championship looks just as good as the New Japan Pro title, or whatever, the world title that they have. Maybe I'm just used to that kind of thing. Maybe the TNT title will look better at the end of it, but I'm not a huge fan. So Lance walks in, and I think he chokeslams Lee Johnson. I think that's the guy that ended up getting chokeslammed. It was one of the enhancement talents from Dark. And, of course, he decides to do that. He's just been doing that. That's his shtick. Arn Anderson comes out with Cody because, obviously, the subplot of this is Arn Anderson and Jake the Snake Roberts being the two mentors. And on Arn's sheet is still Wardlow. And I'm like, that's a little bit old. You might want to get another play sheet for that. Even just for continuity's sake. It sort of threw me off a little bit. Nice little Easter egg catch, I guess. Not something that they thought people would see. But yeah, it still showed Wardlow on it. And I mean, I have seen play sheets back when I played baseball where the coach would have the thing from like 2 or 3 games ago on the back while he's still on his game. So it could have been something like that. But yeah, no, you need to do a little bit better than that. Wardlow was a long time ago. Anyway, so the match begins with a blackout, but Cody gets out of the ring before he can get pinned. And it looks like Lance Archer is just going to dominate this match. But Cody eventually ends up finding ways to go after the ribs. Archer gets sort of pissed off, rips off the turnbuckle padding, and ends up getting his ribs thrown into that exposed turnbuckle for his troubles. But regardless of that, Archer keeps finding ways to get in control. And throughout this match, there were multiple scenes where Big Swole was saying stuff and trying to get involved in a capacity as a crowd member. And Lance Archer was just going after her. They had a bit of a tiff at some point. And holy cow, that extended throughout the rest of the night. Big Swole was probably my favorite crowd member. Shug D also did some really good stuff throughout. But I think at one point when Lance Archer threw Cody outside of the ring with some sort of move. I don't remember exactly what it was just right now, but he threw him out of the ring, and Big Swole was just like, "Oh Lord, he's dead!" And I thought that was hilarious. It was really good. The crowd on both sides, the heel and the face side, were very good at keeping me invested into the match, even at points in matches where I wasn't quite feeling it. This one had a lot of those matches, a lot of parts in that match, rather. It sort of drug on for me. Cody does a DDT in front of Jake the Snake. Then Archer does a spinebuster in front of Arn. Very clearly, they're trying to use some sort of storytelling between that. Hopefully, there's more to this story in the end, but yeah, it was really good. There was also multiple times when Cody was using moves of the Rhodes. He did the flip-flop and flow. He did the Final Reckoning, and then of course he did his own finishing move, and of course Archer kicked out of that. At one point there was a reverse avalanche superplex that happened because it's a Cody match, and of course that happens. But in order for that to get set up, Arn Anderson, while Jake the Snake was distracting the referee for some reason, ballsed Archer onto the top rope. Well, Bryce Remsburg didn't see that because he was being distracted. He was the main referee of the match. But Paul Turner came out, and Paul Turner was like, hey, he went and did this. We can't allow that to stand. So Remsburg was like, all right, yeah, you're right. I'll trust your judgment on this one. Both of them are out. We're going to keep the match rolling, though. So both of the managers were taken out of the match. But there was just very clear the match was rolling down to the end, so it wasn't super big of a deal. However, Jake the Snake comes out, and this is sort of where things turn for the worse for Archer. He looks sort of lost, and commentary mentioned this. He looks sort of lost without Jake the Snake, and I think that that's a very interesting way to play this, because Lance doesn't need Jake. Jake needs Lance. But they're playing it as if it's the other way around, as if Lance needs Jake's assistance in order to be the badass that he is. That's kind of interesting, and I like to see where they go with that. But Jake comes out with a snake, and it looks like he's going to, distract Cody long enough for Lance Archer to pick up the victory. No, Mike Tyson, the man who was supposed to present the belt, comes out and he's just like, yeah, no, we ain't having that today. Jake has his snake, and of course, Mike Tyson has his pythons, those big-ass muscles that he's got. He looks still pretty in good condition, considering his age. I'm very happy that they mentioned that on commentary as well. I really like that line, so I added it to my spiel as well. So Jake eventually leaves, and then Cody takes the reins back in the match and hits Lance Archer with 2 crossroads consecutively, and that's enough for the pinfall 1, 2, 3. This match dragged at points, as I mentioned, but there was a lot of fun involved in it. The ending was trash. I wasn't a big fan of how that went. I think that there was interesting portions to it, but I wasn't a huge fan of Cody doing the 2 crossroads and that being all that it took to take out Lance Archer. I feel like Lance is much more strong than that, could have kicked out, but whatever, they did what they were going to do. I also don't think that Cody should have won, partially because I bet against him, but also partially because I don't think that throughout this, he was supposed to be the babyface, and there was just so many heelish maneuvers going on. I have faith that they'll eventually turn that portion into a storyline down the road as well, but I'm not a huge fan of that ending. However, the match was a very high-quality pay-per-view in the end, and a very high pay-per-view quality match, I should say. And so I have to give it a decent grade accordingly, so I'm going to give it a B+. After that, they did a little segment on Britt Baker's injury, and it looks like she's going to be out for maybe 6 to 8 weeks now instead of 6 to 9 months like we were originally thinking. The injuries that she sustained were nowhere near as bad as we thought that they were. The worst thing that she has is a fracture on her knee, and apparently that can be healed roughly within 4 to 6 months typically, but it's wrestlers, and for whatever reason they just have insane ability to recover, so she'll probably be back within that 6 to 8 week time period. She'll mention it more on Dynamite. And of course, Dr. Sampson was talking about this as if, like, yeah, the injury is not as bad as it sounds. It's just that Britt's a bit insufferable. And I thought that was pretty funny. After that, Penelope Ford versus Chris Statlander to keep with that, continuity, since obviously Chris Statlander was set to face Britt Baker. That happens next. And when Statlander came out, she booped the camera, and my God, I now remember why I love her so much. She made me fall in love with her all over again. It's a shame for me to have to criticize the women's division so much, because I just love the people and I love their characters so much, but when the matches just aren't up to my quality of standard for what they can do and I know they can do, it upsets me. This was another match in which I feel like there's things that I need to mention within it, but I do want to say that I love all of the women in the women's division. It's such a great division. The people are great, the characters are great. It's just that the match quality needs to pick up a little bit, because I know they can do it. Part of it might be that there's a very youthful roster in that women's division, so they still have a little bit of kinks to work out on TV. Part of it is also something that I'll mention at the end of this, mainly in regards to Chris Statlander, but holy cow, I remember why I fell in love with this division. The character work is so great, the women are beautiful, they are just very good at making me get invested into their characters and into the match. But the matches themselves just have a lot of slip-ups here and there, and that upsets me because I know they can do better. Anyway, when Penelope Ford was at the very beginnings of the match coming out, and the match had sort of not quite started just yet, JR made a comment, and I find it hilarious, the juxtaposition of this, so I wanted to share it. He was talking about Penelope, and he says, Ernie Ladd and drag. I mean Penelope Ford. And immediately after that, Tony Schiavone is like, hey, make sure that you guys get Under the Black Hat by Jim Ross. And I was just like, oh my God, stop. You can't do stuff like that. That's just dumb and bad, and not the right time to sell the book. Not the right time at all. Anyway, the match continues onwards. Statlander has a nice dive onto both Kip Sabian, who came out with crutches and looked very injured because of his stuff that happened in the match earlier in the night, in the ladder match. And it looks like Ford's neck gets bent at a very awkward angle. I think that they were able to catch her so that she wasn't too injured. It looked like she was a little bit rattled when she came back into the ring, but throughout the rest of the match looked fine. Statlander went a little bit too far and ended up hitting her head against the barricades. But Sabian looked okay. I think he took the bump pretty decently. But in general, there's just been this common theme, and not just with the women's, but in general, of people doing these topes and doing these high-flying lucha maneuvers and getting in these very awkward positions where it's very clear that they're getting injured or possibly could get very injured. And I'm starting to lose my taste for it now that I'm seeing this, which is a shame because lucha style is one of my favorites. I'm a big fan of it. But when you do it and it ends up resulting in injury, I'd much rather see you do things that are a bit more safe and not nearly as large of a chance of screwing you up for life. You know what I mean? But regardless, very nice dive, very nice maneuver. Statlander brings her back into the ring. They have their little stuff that happens for a little bit. And then she puts her up on the turnbuckle, and the referee, who I think was Paul Turner, but I could be wrong, was like, hey, bring her down. And Statlander just yells at him, no! Which I think is great. The interactions that Statlander has in her matches, the primal yells of agony when she's in moves, the primal yells that she has when she's like hulking up or whatever to get ready to do another move, the amount of like conversation that she'll have with the referee or with the crowd or with the opponent always have been very good. I love the in-ring work that she does, and I've seen this in a lot of wrestlers on AEW. I'm a big fan of them doing that kind of thing. It makes it seem more like the person has some sort of personality in the ring as well as outside of it, and I'm not used to that kind of thing, and it makes me very happy to see, because it's like, oh, they're actually thinking about their characters while they're wrestling as well. That's smart. I like that a lot. Eventually, though, Statlander hits the Big Bang for the win, And it was a fairly decent match. I didn't put a whole lot down for this one because there was so much that happened in the casino ladder match that my mind just sort of shut down at this point in terms of like the wanting to write down stuff, and I just enjoyed the show. But this match was okay. I wasn't as big of a fan of it as I wanted to be. The scary spots, especially that dive, really upset me. But when Statlander does hit moves and she does hit them safely, and there's not this worry in my head of her getting hurt or her opponent getting hurt, as what happened with the DVD onto Statlander on Dynamite, which is no one's real fault. And in that case, it's just gravity took control, and there's nothing you can really do about it. The spot itself was designed to be rather safe. It just didn't work out, so I'm not blaming anybody for that. But when Statlander is able to hit her move safely, and same with anybody else on the women's roster and in the men's roster, but I've seen it more with the women's to make me want to specify that. But when she does hit those moves safely, she looks amazing and is really impressive. Statlander's probably my second or third favorite member of the women's division, Hikaru Shida being my first, and it's between Statlander and Riho for my second spot. Typically, it's more leaning towards Statlander these days since Riho's not on the card, but when she is, I really enjoy her too. And I think what I figured out is I'm really highly critical of the women in the division, but more so of Statlander in particular, because I see a lot of me in how she interacts with her fellow wrestlers. Back when I was younger, and even to the extent of nowadays, whenever I was in some sort of physical competition, I would accidentally hurt the people that I'm around. And I'm not trying to do that. I'm trying to be as safe and as competitive as possible without putting them in danger. But I often would run into people by accident, not being able to stop myself and knocking them over. I would elbow people by accident. None of these things were intentional. I felt so bad after the fact. And I feel like Statlander has a lot of the same stuff going on recently. I don't think it's a lot of her fault. I think it's just circumstances have shown that when she goes for a move, something bad could happen. And, you know, it just sucks because I know that feeling of wanting to do your best, wanting to stay safe, wanting to make sure that everybody around you is okay, and then accidentally screwing up and having to live with that decision. And it eats away at you sometimes. So I think I understand why I'm so hard on Statlander, because I was hard on myself when I did it. But in actuality, Statlander is amazing. I really love her. I think that this match was a fairly good showcase of her moveset, of what she can do. Penelope Ford did an amazing job selling it, did an amazing job doing her comebacks when she needed to as well. All around, it was a decent match. But the scary stuff did take me out of it a little bit, and it reminded me of the things that I was criticizing about the women's division, not only in the last review, but just as in general over the past few years. I do hope that Statlander doesn't have that follow her around, that albatross, because it really affected my psyche in terms of wanting to interact with people in a competitive manner. It's one of the things that made me stop wanting to be part of the lacrosse team, even though I was rather decent at it. It's one of the things that made me give up on basketball, even though I ended up getting an award for, you know, being a good sport kind of thing. And it's one of the things that really screws with me when it comes to any sort of physical confrontation. I hope the same doesn't happen for her, because she really is an amazing amazing athlete. I was going to say actress, because I mean there's also that aspect to it too. But regardless, very decent match. I'm going to give it a B though, because it was one of those matches where I got drawn out of it by some of the things that happened. And as an overall, the match wasn't the highest quality on the card, but it was still very good. So B grade is what I shall give that. The next match was Shawn Spears versus Dustin Rhodes, which wasn't originally scheduled until Wednesday, and it didn't look like it was going to even happen that night. There was an audio glitch during Spears' entrance where the beginning of the show was played during his entrance, and so like there was this overlapping of audio. I don't know how that happened, if it was just on my end, but that happened once or twice throughout the night, and could degrade the overall quality of the pay-per-view in some people's eyes, but it was something that I was able to look past this time because of how invested I was in everything else. But I did want to mention it, at least while I had seen it when it happened, I guess. So Spears comes out, does his heelish stuff, and then he jukes us all out by playing the music and making it look like Dustin's going to come out. but he's in a suit, so like he very clearly knows he's not going to come out, and it was a ploy to get us all to like fall for it. Very good heelish tactics. I love that kind of stuff. And it also leads into a very predictable but still very fun kind of spot where the music will play again. He's like, I only told you guys to do it once, come on. And then Dustin will come out, and that's exactly what happens. Brandy comes out to the music though instead, and then they have a nice scene that's very reminiscent of the things that Keith Lee was doing on NXT back when I was watching, where the camera angle will show the opponent, and then Keith Lee would like sort of pop up out of nowhere. And the exact same thing happened here with Dustin Rhodes. Very gifable moment, and I think that people saw in AEW, that is, people saw what happened with Keith Lee and how amazing he was at becoming gifable, becoming memeable, that they're like, okay, we got to take some ideas and inspiration from that, and they did exactly that here. And while I prefer when Keith Lee does it, because I think that he's much better with the comedic timing of it, as well as the actual like, oh shit, he's gonna beat the crap out of you kind of stuff, this was still a very good option. And I think that the camera visuals of it were very good. They did a very good job of hiding Dustin, and the commentary team did a very good job of not letting on that he was there, and it just worked in perfection for this particular thing. So obviously this match was supposed to be a comedy match, and Dustin ends up like ripping off the clothing and suits and all that of Sean Spears until he's in his underwear. And at one point they show his underwear, and he's got a picture of Dolly Blanchard on his crotch. I don't know why they did that, but they did that. This is old school comedy kind of stuff, but, you know, have at it, I guess. Whatever. Eventually the final recording hits, and Dustin wins the match. Very much a squash match. I already told you guys I only grade squash matches at the highest, a C+ grading. Unless, of course, there is some extenuating circumstances, Marco Stunt being one, where his matches, even if he does win, and it's very clearly that he's going to win, makes it feel like it's not going to be, so I give him higher grades. If there's some storyline aspects to it that are told, then I give higher grades there. You know, that kind of stuff. By the way, just so that we're all clear, once that had happened, this is a C+ grade, by the way. Once that had happened, I still only have one match that I've correctly guessed, one prediction that I got right. Everything else I've lost on. Maybe I didn't judge this as properly as I thought I did. Regardless, that's what happens when you decide to make predictions, and I just have to live with those consequences. Then they did a commercial for All Out, which is going to be happening on September 5th. They didn't give a location for what's going to be happening because we're not entirely certain where the world will be in that scenario. I would like to see it happen somewhere other than Daly's Place, because while this pay-per-view at Daly's Place looked amazing, having it be in front of a live audience is something that I think everybody wants to see if possible, but if not, it's okay, we understand. So after that, they do a nice memorial for Hana Kimura, who recently passed away. There was a lot of online social media bullshit that happened with her, and I mentioned this in the Mitochondriac podcast. This kind of stuff pisses me off and makes me feel so bad, because she was my age. She was 22. She did not deserve to go through the bullshit that she went through, and while the decision that she made is not one that I'm particularly happy with her having made. I understand where she's coming from. I had the same kind of thoughts at one point in my life, and it sucks that she was driven to the point where that seemed to be her only option. I hate that, but I am glad that they did a memorial for her. Rest in peace, Hana Kimura. I hope that you really do. And Jesus Christ, guys, be nicer to each other. It's not that difficult. Stop bullying people online. It doesn't make you cool. It doesn't make you awesome. You're just a dick. Anyway, moving past that. Then we move on to Nyla Rose versus Hikaru Shida. And one of the things that I noticed in this match is that it seemed to very much be in honor of Hana Kimura in certain ways. I didn't get to watch any of her matches because she was so young, and I didn't even really know who she was until this bullshit went down, which is a shame in of itself, but that's more on me as a wrestling fan than it is on her as a wrestler. But it seemed that this match changed its tone from what it originally would have been because of what happened. And I think that's one of the reasons why the ending was the way that it was as well. Could be wrong about that. They might have been building to this all the way. And I have a little bit of evidence to support that theory as well. But I'll get to that when I get to that. In the beginning promo for this match, though, something that is a nice light note, and something that brought me out of the sadness that I had after seeing the Hana Kimura Memorial thing, is Tiffany Castagna. I think that's how you pronounce her name. I apologize if I mispronounced her last name. She's a very amazing person who I saw on Twitter and is very good friends with Cody. One of the super fans, I guess you could say. She was in the crowd for one of the promotions for this match, and I was so proud of her. She's an amazing person. I wish her nothing but the best, and this was one of those great moments of being able to see her on a nationally televised and internationally programmed pay-per-view event, and she gets to shine in all her glory as a fan, and I think that's amazing. I guarantee you Cody had something to do with that, because he and she are very close friends apparently. He's posted pictures of her on Twitter and very clearly recognizes her. She's one of his biggest fans. It's great. Anyway, moving past that, Nyla Rose begins the match very much in the lead and very much on track for winning the whole thing. And she ends up slamming Shida through like a table with poker chips on it. I guess you could call it a poker table, but didn't have like the green felt, and it wasn't like a typical poker table you'd see. It was just like a regular table with poker chips and stuff on top of it. Anyway, and she says always bet on black, which was hilarious. There was a lot of comedy spots throughout the entire night. There was a nice light vibe to it. So even the matches that were very clearly designed to be more serious, including this one, there was the comedy thrown in there. And I love that they're allowing their people to do that. It just makes it so much more fun to watch. And honestly, if you're not watching wrestling for the fun, you're in the wrong business. If you're watching something to be a serious competitive brawl between people, go watch UFC. If you're trying to watch people who are going to strive to always be the best and not have any fun whatsoever, this isn't for you. So my grandfather just walked in. That's why you heard the knocking. I'll get back to him later. I'm almost finished with this. The match continued on, and at some point, Hikaru Shida finds another kendo stick. It might have been the one from earlier, but I think it was another one. And she says, "I found my kendo stick, bitch," and just swings it. Really good stuff. The back and forth between these two throughout the match is one of the things that made this match for me. Then there was a suplex in the ring onto the kendo stick, but it only got two. Then a little bit later on, Shida is up on the top and does an avalanche falcon arrow. She does the deal. Holy cow. That's got to be the end of the match, right? No one kicks out of the falcon arrow, especially an avalanche falcon arrow. Only for two. Whew. Good spot. And it scared me a little bit, because I was just like, Shida's a really strong girl, but surely she's not going to do this, right? And she does, and it worked. I'll take it. It was one of those types of things, though, where it looked very clearly like Nyla did assist her, which you kind of have to for superplexes in general. And the only difficult part of the move in terms of what Shida has to do, aside from the fact that it's a superplex and that has its own difficulties, is the spinning portion of the falcon arrow, and she did a very good job of that. I think that it looked very good. Regardless, moving on. Shida gets the kendo stick, and there's a lot of stuff that I'm missing. This match was insane. It was all over the place. Shida gets her kendo stick again, and basically just does a home run shot, cracking it over Nyla Rose's head. I hope Nyla's okay. Jesus Christ, that looked painful. And then she follows that with her knee strike that she's begun using, and I guess the 1-2-3 for that. Very good match. I did not expect it to go in the direction that it did, but it was very clearly a well-booked match, and the two have amazing chemistry, surprisingly enough. I didn't really think that Nyla Rose and Shida would be as good of a match as it was, which is, shame on me for thinking that, because they're both amazing wrestlers. But this was probably, in my opinion, the best women's championship match that they've had, and maybe even the best women's match that they've had. And that's saying a lot, because I was a really big fan of Riho Nyla Rose 2, where Nyla Rose won the title. But good lord, this match was insane. And one of the things that I think led me into realizing, well, I obviously made the wrong decision here, is they never changed the size of the belt for Nyla, which if she were to hold the title for a much longer period of time, you would have thought that they would have done, because it just looked like a play toy in her hands, which maybe was what they were going for anyway, regardless of the outcome of this. But the fact that the title was still designed for a smaller waist made it seem very much to me like they weren't going to keep the title on her for very long. That, or they just didn't have the ability to change it because of the crazy stuff that happened in the world. That explains why the TNT title belt was the way that it was too. So maybe I'm just a little bit looking into that too much. But regardless, my girl is the champion. Hikaru Shida is the champion. I didn't think this was going to happen as soon as it did, but I'm glad that it has, because she is an amazing person, and she's an amazing wrestler, and I cannot wait to see the matches that she has, because she will elevate that title to the heights that only we can dream of. And that's saying a lot, because Riho did a very good job of that. She made the title, as the first champion of it, she made it very powerful and very worthwhile to get. Same with Nyla Rose. She made it seem like a big deal when she was able to be on TV. Obviously, she was off TV for a while, as was Riho. Now that Shida's the champion, she'll probably be on TV more often, because Shida's almost always on TV nowadays. But regardless of that portion of it, they all made the belt feel like a big deal. And Shida being the champion now makes it feel like even more so of one. I am a little bit sad that Nyla lost the title so soon. I think that she could have had an amazing monster run with it, and eventually down the line Statlander or Shida take it away from her. I would have even been fine if Big Swole had a nice match with her, maybe not taking the title from her, but had a good match with her. But they never got around to that, and they moved the title on to Shida, which I think in the end is the best decision. Shida is a very good champion, and Nyla doesn't need the title to have good matches. I think that she is much better in character work positions where she goes after somebody. Her matches with Shanna proving that, in my opinion, because Shanna, not being as high profile as a Britt Baker or Hikaru Shida, made that still feel like she and Nyla made that match and that feud still feel really real and really good. I wish that Shanna would come back. I have no clue where she is, possibly in Portugal. But she was also very good. I'd like to see her come back in some capacity. Regardless, A quality for the match. Very good match. Probably one of my favorite matches on the card in general. It was just very good. Anyways, the next match, which I'm surprised wasn't the main event. This was the co-main event that they had. The first of two is what they called it, which is bullshit. It's the penultimate match. It's not a main event. I hate when they try to do that co-main event bullshit. No, that's not how this works. You have one main event. You have one match that is the main event. It is the thing that people come to watch, and it's the thing that happens at the end of the card. Anyway, I understand why they did it, because the Stadium Stampede technically happened yesterday. They re-recorded it, or the day before, rather. They recorded it on Friday because there was possibilities of rainstorms at night in Jacksonville. So they wanted to make sure that they had it, recorded and ready for the pay-per-view. Also because of how crazy it was, they wanted to be able to edit it and make it look good, which makes sense. Regardless, Moxley versus Brody Lee was next. And Ten comes out with a belt, and a bunch of other Dark Order members are with Brody Lee. And Ten has a sling. Nice continuity stuff there. I'm glad that they stuck with that. It would have been jarring to just see Ten as Ten without some sort of indication of having his arm practically snapped, even if that was only kayfabe. But regardless, very good stuff. I'm glad that they did that. Brody Lee's entrance is Brody Lee's entrance, though, regardless of that. So, nothing much to say there. But Mox comes out with a very nice jacket on, even though he doesn't have the title because Brody Lee stole it. His jacket makes up for it in terms of the gold that he needs to have around him. It was a very nice jacket. He sat there, letting us admire it for a good while, too. He did a good job of that. I'm not sure if he had people in his ear telling him to do that, or if he just did it of his own accord, but very good timing with that. Throughout the match, Brody Lee also is messing with Big Swole, which happened a lot throughout the night. Nyla Rose was also messing with her. Swole was just like I said, the premier fan in the crowd during this entire show. I loved it. It was great. There was a spot later on where Brody Lee and Jon Moxley are going after each other, and Moxley goes for a drop kick, but Brody Lee had also gone for one. Brody Lee's got his off first, and he ended up getting the better of that exchange. which I thought was very nice. The entire match, at the very beginning portions of it more so, but the entire match was talking about the past that the two have had, and that they very clearly know each other. Obviously, the Shield and the Wyatt family had their things back in WWE, but being able to see that these two members, who, in my opinion, were the third fiddle in their factions. Sadly, Dean Ambrose was not able to shine past Seth Rollins and Roman Reigns. Just wasn't allowed for the majority of their feud. And the same goes for Luke Harper. Even though I would probably normally want to consider him more prominent than Eric Rowan. Eric Rowan then took on later on a much more prominent role within the company than Luke Harper did. So it seemed more to me that Luke Harper was seen as the second fiddle. He just got himself over more within the Wyatt family. Regardless, being able to see these two fight for the title in AEW as equals and as very dominant people made it feel all the more special. There were a lot of really big spots. This match went all over the place. It was very much a no disqualification match without being a no DQ match. But Brody Lee gets tossed into this timekeeper's table. He was looking to powerbomb Moxley onto it. But he gets just sort of like thrown over in that typical spot that you see where people go through the table. It's sort of like a back body drop of sorts. But he gets tossed into that, and his legs bounce off the chairs and the barricade. I hope he's okay. There was a lot of spots like that where they're very terrifying. Later on, there was a paradigm shift that went through the entrance ramp, and very clearly that was designed to be a spot where they did the bleeding job for Brody Lee, and luckily he didn't cut too deep. He did just a nice cut so that you could see a decent amount of blood, but it wasn't Dustin Rhodes or Eddie Guerrero levels of bleeding out kind of blood. They focused away from the entrance ramp so you didn't see that kind of stuff happening, which I think was smart. After everything that happened with the Full Gear incident in Baltimore, I think that they wanted to make sure that no one ever had to worry about that again, or at the very least, for this pay-per-view, don't have to worry about that again. So they didn't make it look like it was a purposeful bleeding where, people intentionally bled. It was an accidental thing. Very smart, very smart. Brody Lee comes back into the ring, goes for a discus lariat, misses, gets hit by a paradigm shift, kicks out at 1. Another one happens. He kicks out at 2. So Moxley's pissed, but he doesn't get that, let that get the best of him. He immediately goes for a choke. Looks like a bulldog choke is what they call it, and then he turns it into a rear naked choke. And surprisingly enough, that makes Brody Lee pass out. Moxley's really being shown as some sort of MMA background kind of character, and I think that's a very interesting take on him, because it's not something that I would have considered as the main qualities of Jon Moxley. But being able to make Brody Lee pass out so that the referee had to stop the match ends up for the win. Moxley retains his title. Hooray, I guess. I now got 3 things correct, because I also got the Nyla Rose prediction correct. But I did not expect it to go this way. I thought that it was going to be more of a disqualification win and they continue the storyline. This will continue it in a different way, because Brody Lee got knocked out by a chokehold, but he didn't tap out. So, he might have a legitimate complaint to be like, listen, I didn't tap out, and even though you didn't hear me responding to you, I was telling you things. You just weren't listening. He could pull some BS like that out, and it could even strengthen the resolve of the Dark Order, because they think that there's a conspiracy against them. I never thought of it that way, but that's a very smart booking decision. I think that this has more potential in the end. This was an A-quality match, though, so I'm very glad that this was as good as it was. I was hoping it would be, and it lived up to every one of my expectations, and continued the story in a way that I think will be good. Because Brian Cage has the chip, I'm not entirely certain if Brian Cage will be going up against Moxley immediately, if the Brody Lee stuff will continue for a little bit, if Brian Cage is going to go after Darby Allin for a little bit first. There could be a little bit of a feud between the two of them. Possibly could even see Darby Allin winning that and going up against Moxley. I could be fine with that too. But regardless, I do want to see Brian Cage versus Moxley at some point. I do want to see Brian Cage versus Darby Allin at some point. And I would like to see another rendition of Moxley versus Brody Lee. This was a very good match. After that, they did an ad for their unrivaled collection of action figures that are going to be coming out in August. And the action figures look okay. I'm not a huge fan of the style that they decided to go for. I was always a big fan of the Mattel wrestling figures, where there's not nearly as many joints to worry about. So they are a little bit more stiff to work with, but you still are able to get full range of motion for the most part. These, they look like they could sort of have ways to get your fingers cut up in them, and I'm not a huge fan of those types of wrestling figures. This is going to be going for about an hour. Didn't mean for that to happen. Regardless, Stadium Stampede was the final match of the night, and the entrances that they had were dope. They basically did like a football entrance where they named off the numbers for the inner circle of what they were wearing. They were all dressed up in football gear and had like football stuff as their weaponry, which was very fascinating. And they came out from one tunnel, whereas the Elite came out from another tunnel. But when the Elite came out, Hangman did not come out with them, which was very interesting, and it's sort of indicative of this whole thing. But Kenny Omega reassured his boys that like he's coming out, just give him time. And boy, did he come out. So the match continues on for a little while, maybe a couple minutes, not even that very long, and it's just insane from that point on till the very end of it. Very crazy match. But Hangman does come out eventually, not too long into the match even, and he's riding a horse, because of course he is. And one of the running themes throughout this was hilarious. It was Sammy Guevara being chased by people. Oh my god, I'm so glad that happened in that street fight, so that we can continue to see this hilariousness. I hope they don't overrun it into the ground kind of stuff, but at least it's become funny now in terms of them being able to use it in multiple ways. This was one of them. So Hangman chases him down with a horse. They go into the back, and Hangman goes searching for him, but Sammy's nowhere to be found. Eventually Sammy comes back, and he starts beating the crap out of I want to say it was Nick Jackson, but there was just the Inner Circle had the advantage for a little while, and they were cheering on Sammy while he was doing this. And then they like zoom over to the cheerleaders, or at least one set of the cheerleaders, because there was a cheerleading team for the Inner Circle and a cheerleading team for the Elite. And the ones that were cheering for the Inner Circle were all cheering Sammy in unison with the Inner Circle, which was hilarious. Santana does an Acai moonsault after somebody else did some sort of maneuver. They did their typical spots here. But the Acai moonsault was definitely worth mentioning. And then after that, Sammy does a shooting star press onto pretty much everybody. I think that Kenny and Hager were able to get away from it pretty much unscathed, but almost everybody else was knocked down by it. This match was so freaking insane. It was the definition of DDT Pro Wrestling in an AEW arena. Like it was crazy stuff. There was a lot that went on. So I'm missing a lot of it. If you're gonna watch any match from the pay-per-view, watch this one. Do yourself a favor and watch this one. It was batshit crazy. Matt Jackson ends up getting a ladder at one point, and you sort of see him doing this in the background while his brother is getting beat up by Sammy and Chris Jericho. And I thought that was hilarious, but also like, okay, cool, whatever, you do you. But he sets up the ladder, gets onto the goalposts, and then does like a moonsault onto Sammy and Chris, which of course also ends up hitting Nick in the process, because why not? Even with the bruised ribs, you're going to be doing that? Come on, Matt. Like, care about your safety a little bit. But also don't, because that was hilarious and amazing. Only gets 2 count from that. If the match ended with just that, it still would have been an amazing match, and I would have given it a very high grade. But I'm glad it didn't end there, because Sammy starts. Sammy, after running away, is very clearly nowhere near where Hangman's looking for him, but he's still looking for him on the horse. He eventually gets to the concourse that leads to the bar, and he just walks to it. He's just like, all right, stay here, horse. I'm going to go get myself a drink. And that was hilarious. So then they decide to switch back to Santana and Ortiz, and they powerbomb Kenny onto some sort of thing. Very clearly, it was designed for the purpose of what they made it for, but it looked like it was some sort of like pallets of some sort that he landed on. Very devastating looking maneuver. They only get a 2 count from this though, Oh wait, no. That was a different spot that I'm thinking of entirely. No, they powerbomb him on top of. There was like a guardrail that they positioned on top of two tables. Kenny did, and he ends up getting attacked by both Santana and Ortiz. He was trying to put Ortiz through it, I think. And they do their assisted powerbomb, breaks the guardrail in half. He lands onto the concrete. It looked very painful, but also looked like they broke the fall enough so that it wasn't like the worst amount of pain, but very painful nonetheless. And this only gets a 2 thanks to Matt Hardy. So one of the underlying themes throughout this was that Hangman was off doing his own thing, and Matt Hardy and Kenny Omega were working together for a while. This eventually changed later on down in the match, but it changed for the better, in my opinion, but we'll get there. So Ortiz and Santana, because Kenny's basically out for a little bit, decide to just work on Matt Hardy. They throw him into the pool that they have in Jacksonville Stadium for whatever reason, and Ortiz is like, I can't swim, but it's only 3 feet of water, so Santana's like, get your ass in here, you dumbass. They end up like trying to drown Matt Hardy, but he comes out and he's got like the V1 bullshit, the shocker, and I just love that. They have like the Matt facts, and just it's like, hey, did you know that Matt Hardy can hold his breath for 356 seconds or something like that? I was just like, what why? This is so great though, I love it. He was just like, you guys don't have the matitude to stick up with me or whatever. When he's being drowned, quote unquote, he's just doing the shocker like pose, looking at the camera. I'm just like, oh my god, it's great. And it looks like from that, and the commentary mentions this as well as a possibility, thanks Excalibur, I appreciate that the pool has water from the Lake of Reincarnation, so now it's the Pool of Reincarnation, and I want that to become canon, so that anytime they're fighting at Daly's Place, if they go to that, it's the Pool of Reincarnation, and you can have Brody Lee become Luke Harper for a second or some shit. Would be hilarious. Regardless, Santana then backdropped onto Ortiz by Hardy through a table at some point. I don't remember exactly when this got set up or how it got set up, but it happened. It was a thing. And this happens with like the bell that they have stationed there in the background. And I was just like, oh, okay, well, obviously they're going to eventually use that in some capacity. And they did. It was great. Ortiz gets his bell rung, literally. Like, he's right next to the bell. It gets hit. The noise, like, concussively knocks him out for a second. He's doing his typical spazzing that he does. And Matt Hardy's just talking to him. He's like, let me put you in the wheel of chairs. Or the chair of wheels. Chair of wheels. And he takes, like, some duct tape that he gets out of nowhere. It was just insane. It wraps him up into this chair, and he's just like, take one of these, punches him, and call me in the morning. And I'm just like, this is so insane. I love it. It's great. Hardy then locks Santana into an icebox. It looked like he was going to get thrown back into it, like the spot they had in the street fight. No, this ends up putting Santana in that. And when he locks him in, he uses like a broom. Nice, cleaner kind of reference. And he is basically out for the rest of the match. But Matt Hardy says, this will help with your inflammation, which the amount of crazy bullshit that happened in this match is only supplemented by the fact that Matt Hardy was saying crazier bullshit throughout it. It was just great. Eventually, Jake Hager went searching for Hangman, finds the horse, and goes to talk with Hangman. And it looks like they're just going to enjoy a nice little drink and just stay away from the action for a while. Hangman comes in, looks at him, he's just like, did you come here to fight, or did you come here to drink? And Hager prior to that was just like, do you really think I wasn't going to find you here? And it looks like the two are just going to sort of sit down and have a nice little drink. Hangman pours him one. They, take a nice little shot together, and then Hangman attacks. He's just like, what's the difference if you came to fight or drink? We're going to fight anyway, more or less. Hager ends up dragging Hangman over the bar like it was in an old classic Western movie, and it looked very painful, and it looked like it was not designed the way that it's done in the movies, as in, like, it was not slippery at all. So he was just very clearly being dragged forcefully in ways that likely hurt a lot. Anyway, he then takes him and powerbombs him through a table, but only gets a 2 count from this, which it could have ended there and the match still would have gotten a very high grading in my opinion, but no, they continued it on for even crazier antics. eventually Omega comes and joins him, and this is where things got good, because Omega and Hangman are back together again, and I've missed these two. They have amazing chemistry, and this just goes to show that Hangman and Omega, when they work together, can really bring Hangman back from his dark depressive states. And Omega really does care deeply about Hangman. I love it. It made me so happy. But they take bottles and they just smash them over Hager's head. The second one, I think it was Hangman who said this, but it could have been Omega. He was just like, how about a double? And he snaps it over his head again. And they just hit him with like 10 bottles or whatever. And then eventually Kenny like gets down on the ground. Hangman does like a flip off of him and buckshot lariats Hager over the bar. Hager's out for the rest of the match, kind of stuff. Hangman gets over the bar and gets like a thing of milk and a thing of milk flavored whiskey, and he's just like, hey, you want a drink? And Kenny's like, yeah. So he pours him the milk because, you know, straight edge and all that, and drinks the milk whiskey himself, and it's so good. It's so good. I really missed him. Meanwhile, back down on the playing field, the football field, that's what the word I was looking for. Matt Jackson and Sammy Guevara are going at it. Eventually, Matt Jackson gets the upper hand, and he goes for Northern Lights suplexes, and he goes with a locomotion Northern Lights suplexes, and he starts around the, I would say, 10-yard line, thereabouts, and he just keeps going. And they flash between him and Chris Jericho now. Nick Jackson are fighting. And they flash back and forth between the two. And Matt Jackson just keeps going. Eventually gets a touchdown. They don't do what I hoped that they would do, where they just went like this. Rick Knox really should have done that. But what they did do instead was Matt Jackson like did a dance of some sort based off of one of the players from NFL whose name doesn't ring a bell for me. It's been a while since I've watched too, so regardless. But Rick Knox throws a penalty flag, and it's just like excessive celebration, 15-yard penalty, and Matt's just like, are you kidding me? And just super kicks him. Rick Knox is out for the rest of the match. Good stuff. In between all of this, of course, Jericho gets the chains. I don't remember what they're actually called, but it's basically the chains that you check to see if somebody's gotten the first down. And he just sort of like hurls it like a javelin at Nick. And once he hits him with it, he's just like, that'll move the chains. And I was just like, oh my god. The amount of just silliness is great. And then after he does that, Jackson DeVille, which is the mascot for the Jaguars, comes out. And he just sort of does like some, like, what are you doing? And just like dances like he's supposed to as a mascot. He ends up getting hit with the Judas effect. He's out for the rest of the match. But then Nick sees that Jericho's like near the net, and so he super kicks him. Jericho falls into the net falls over, and I can't remember, I think it might have been Bryce Remsburg, but one of the no, it was Aubrey Edwards. It was Aubrey Edwards. She goes and she's like, it's good. And I'm just like, yes, they did one of the things that I wanted them to do. It was great. But then Jericho later on gets out of that and fights Nick Jackson for a little bit. Hits him with something or other. I want to say it was like a power slam of some sort. Goes for the pin, and Aubrey only counts her for 2. And she's just like, it was only 2. He's like, I call a challenge for that. He pulls out a red flag out of nowhere from his pants. And she's like, you can't challenge it. And she's just like, I'm going to challenge it. I called for the challenge. He's like, okay, we'll go to the booth. They go to the booth. He follows her in there, and he sees it with her. It's very clearly a 2 count. She very clearly saw the arms go up. Like, it was the worst challenge in history. So, of course, he loses the challenge. It fails. So Matt Jackson, after basically destroying Sammy Guevara with his locomotion Northern Lights suplexes, comes and helps his brother. He puts Jericho onto a table, and Nick goes running down the entire flight of stairs from this one portion of the arena, and then just does like a body splash. There's no need for that. I honestly thought that they were going to do one of those like Monty Python skit things. So when Hangman Adam Page did his 100-yard dash, one of the people that I'm friends with, not necessarily friends with, I don't particularly know them, but one of the people within one of the servers that I'm in, who I've talked with on occasion, made a Monty Python reference. I don't remember exactly which one it is, but it's basically of a knight that's like charging a castle, and you hear like a drum roll, like boom, 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 and it just shows him basically not having moved from very far, and there's a guy eating an apple who's one of the guards of this castle. He eventually gets stabbed, and the guy goes through the rest of the town. I thought that they were going to do that with this spot because they missed the opportunity with the buckshot lariat from Hangman back on Dynamite. They didn't, but it was very reminiscent of that and reminiscent of the 100-yard dash that Hangman did. Very unnecessary, but very funny regardless. That only gets a 2 count, though. No, they didn't even pin him, now that I think about it. They probably should have pinned him, but it would have only gotten a 2 count. Anyway, Hangman comes out after that happens with the line marker for whatever reason, and he just chalks Jericho. Jericho's out for the rest of the match. So now, pretty much the entire Elite is going after Sammy Guevara. That's, their main goal now, is to chase him down. But Sammy, obviously being just in the worst of shape from those Northern Light suplexes, is like crawling away from the end zone, and then the sprinklers come on and hit him. Oh my god, beautiful! I love it. He ends up like crawling away, and people are just like doing H2O chants. They're like H2O, H2O, and it like eventually switches over to AEW, which is hilarious. I love that. Good stuff. But after he gets up and he's just sort of like, I'm the last man standing, I won, which isn't the rules to the match whatsoever. He hears the golf cart, and Matt Hardy and Kenny Omega are in the golf cart, and they do the chase down. They don't hit him this time, though. He does get out of the way, eventually climbs and is like running away, but all of the members of the Elite are chasing after him. But as he's running away, of course Hangman takes the time to go on, get! And it's just, oh my god, I love you, Hangman. Stop doing these things to make me love you. I don't want to so much, but you... Anyway, so as Guevara's running away, Neo, which is Natural Electronic Organism, is the abbreviation for him, which is the new Vanguard. Neo 1 comes out and basically just distracts Sammy long enough for the Elite to catch up to him. Eventually, Omega puts him into the One-Winged Angel and jumps from like at least 15 to 20 feet and hits it through some shit. I don't know what it was. It was another like pallet thing that they set up, but regardless, it looked insane. Aubrey Edwards, I think, was the referee who came to the count. Obviously, that gets the win. 1, 2, 3. What a match. I didn't even cover all of it. This was just a lot of the fun parts that I saw. There was so much more to this match. Jesus Christ, what a match. Obviously, it's an A+. At the end of the match, they do a Gatorade bath onto Kenny because he's the guy who won the match for them. Oh, okay, cool. Just go ahead and just throw all of the shit into this. Why not? Fireworks go off in the background. Hangman hugs Kenny. Hangman's with the crew. He doesn't run off at the end. Is everything better? I don't know yet. But, and even though the Elite stand tall, book's out today, there was one thing that I noticed that will likely get brought up on Dynamite, and I think that this was beautifully done. And before I get to the end grade of the show, I'm going to talk about this for a second. So in the promotion stuff that they had prior to the match, they never really showed Hangman. Whenever they were talking about the Elite, they continue to only show Kenny, Cody, and the Bucks. They didn't show Hangman in any of those pictures. Hangman's going to get pissed when he sees that. He's going to get pissed. And I think it's deserved. Now, something else to keep in mind. Matt Hardy was supposed to come in to replace Nick. He came in to replace Cody. Cody didn't do jack shit for the Elite during all of this stuff. He did nothing for them once he got into the TNT Championship tournament. Hangman was the guy who was doing majority of the saving. Like, not gonna lie, even though he was gone for a decent portion, and Kenny and Matt were very clearly the people that held the banner for the Elite, when Hangman was there, he was doing the majority of the saving. And Kenny's going to be the one who gets the credit for all of this. There's very clearly going to be some separations there. And I'm glad that they built that up because that could be amazing. Now, because of the grades that I've given, all of these matches, majority of them being A grades. There was a squash match, obviously, and there were two B and B plus grades. I can only assume that the show itself needs to get an A. I didn't really set up the final... Oh shit, I'm sorry guys. I wanted to get a little bit more comfortable for the formal portion of this video. I didn't set up a final grade for what I actually wanted the show to be, because I didn't think about that until right now that I'm thinking about it, obviously. And the show was just great. It was very good. I don't think it was better than Revolution. I think Revolution was a better card in general, but this was a very fun card, one that we very desperately needed during this time, and I know that they did it on purpose that way, because the main thing that they were talking about throughout this is it's been a very tough time for all of us. Shad Gaspard passing, Hana Kimura passing, the coronavirus stuff. We all needed some form of entertainment, some sort of laughs, some sort of ability to take our mind off of shit, and this was exactly that. They did a very good job. They still didn't distract us from it entirely. They let us, remind us that things in the world are not as good as they are, but they didn't do it to a point where we very clearly were depressed from it. It was hey, this is stuff that's going on, and we're doing this to try and help through that, and I think that was a very smart maneuver on their part. But yeah, the show was amazing. I'm going to give it an A. I could also see giving it an A-, just because there was a squash match on a pay-per-view, which doesn't make any sense, and just because one of the women's matches and the TNT Championship match was supposed to be hyped up to be a very good match. We're nowhere near the quality that I would have liked to have seen from the competitors, because I know they all could do better. But regardless of that, what they did was amazing still in those matches, so I can't blame them too much, and the rest of the show really made up for it in the long run. So I'm not going to judge a show based on its two worst moments. I'm going to judge it based on the overall, and the overall was most certainly high quality. Definitely going to give it an A grade. In the end, I got 3 things right. I guessed that Moxley would win. He won. I guessed that Nyla would retain. Oh wait, no, I got that wrong. I only got 2 things right. So I guess that Best Friends would win, and I guess that Moxley would win. Everything else went the exact opposite way that I thought it was, and I didn't even get the guess correct on who was the mystery entrant. I probably could have if I thought about it more and realized that Brian Cage would make perfect sense for Taz, who, I don't know if I mentioned this, but Taz came out with him, and it's very clear that Taz, has some sort of beef with Darby Allin, and that's why I think that the Darby Allin and Brian Cage thing will continue onward. Anyway, I've talked for long enough. It's been an hour and 15. I meant for this to only go 20 minutes, but the show was so good that it deserved at least an hour of me ranting about it. This is going to be unedited, as has become typical. Hopefully the audio quality for it's much better than the past ones, but regardless of that, I'm the Jack number 13. I hope that you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you next time. I'm going to sign out. See you then.